Thank you for hanging in there and staying with us to this last panel and block whatever it is we're in, Studio 3. We're going to talk, we're all European. What did he say, 48 people? Some are 14? Anyway, there's a lot of us coming over from Europe, and there are a lot of people who live in America who originate in Europe. We are going to introduce ourselves individually. Christine Perret, in case that didn't come across before. And then we're going to discuss what some of the drivers are that has made Europe so successful in augmented reality development and the businesses that are there, and some of the constraints, some of the things that are holding Europe back with respect to augmented reality adoption. So I'd like to invite Miquel Salazar to introduce yourself.
Well, I am Michael Salazar. I am a CEO of Augmented Interaction, a startup I recently created. And well, I work in the field of user interaction and user experience. And I have a first-person experience from the how things work in creating a startup in Europe.
I'm Martijn Bosch. I'm CEO of Derrix. We're based in Switzerland, in Lausanne, Switzerland. We do thermal augmented reality for firefighters. So we did a pilot project with firefighters and projected thermal information in their field of view with very good results, and now we're trying to make a product out of that.
Hi, I'm Giovanni Landi. I work in the field of augmented reality since almost 5 years. I had the opportunity to apply it to many different fields and to follow its evolution. Now I work mainly in valorization of cultural heritage, and I work with a lot of museums for an Italian company, ETT, and I'm also the Chief Experience Officer of a robotics company called Archon that is involved in in autonomous flight of drones, of fleets of drones.
Thank you, gentlemen. I want to remind those of you who might not be aware of the history of augmented reality in Europe, some of the sort of the highlights of the last 15 years, because we'll be referencing some of those as we have a discussion. So I guess you could say sort of a nucleus, a seed in the town of Munich, Germany. There's an important technical university in Munich that was very early in doing practical, basic and applied research in the area of augmented reality. Received a lot of government funding, and one of the startups that came out of technical university was Munich was Metaio. And Metaio grew to about 100 and something people in the Munich area, and then many of you know was acquired in the spring of 2015 by Apple. So from a historical point of view, that's noteworthy. Another thing is that in the UK and in Holland, Layer was a very early augmented reality company based in Amsterdam. There's Wikitude in Salzburg, and there are many augmented reality companies that have been around for, some of them, more than 10 years. Some of them also are not around anymore. There's a lot of companies in France that do augmented reality as well. You don't hear about those that don't speak English because they are not marketing to the North American market. So I wanted to point out that there's a lot of universities and there's a lot of history of augmented reality in Europe. And what that's done from a consumer point of view is people have been exposed to augmented reality in Europe for 5, 8, even longer years. So there's been a long history of exposure. So that's what I'd kind of like to end as an introduction to the background for you to understand. And I'd like to ask the panelists to comment about what they see to be the drivers for AR adoption or development in European countries. Giovanni, you have a strong position on this subject because of the cultural heritage.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to complete your list, pointing that also the Vuforia was almost completely based in Vienna, and okay, it's not completely related to augmented reality, but it had been a really cool enabling technology. But Unity was actually born in Copenhagen, and I think that, but we will come back to that later. Like in many other places, when business gets too big, it's quite a natural step to move, to get global and to move to other countries. Yes, and going back to your question, of course, having so much cultural heritage, and as I had the opportunity to point in my talk, being augmented reality such an ideal technology to create a relation with cultural heritage. Traveling around Europe, I see a lot of museums that made experiments and are carrying out already experiments with augmented reality. And yes, I think this could be a really big market that simply doesn't exist in other countries in the world.
I can add to that the idea that since there are so many cultures, there are also a lot of languages, and we have to translate between them. So augmented reality has become an interesting tool to translate between different languages, and it is proving like a very interesting solution for many many use cases in tourism and catering, for example.
Mm-hmm. Hospitality, the hospitality industry, and yeah. Mm-hmm. What are your opinions, Martin? What do you see to be the drivers of augmented reality, either development or adoption in Europe?
Well, drivers for our story, at least, what is an important driver is that there's quite a strong public service, and there's quite some funding actually in the government for, like, we're developing a product for firefighters. And I have a bit of feeling that would be harder in the US than in a European country to get funding for these kind of things. So that's for us is really a driver.
There's a mandate for the kinds of solutions that are for public safety in Europe that you might not see in North America, just to compare these two geographies. Who wants to take up the Industry 4.0 part? Okay, no, Giovanni.
I'm not into any Industry 4.0 project, but that is, I think it's connected to the fact that a lot of investments in Europe come from European Union. And they have these framework programs that, for example, the one that just ended in 2013 was a lot focused on innovation of the valorization and preservation of cultural heritage, and that actually created an industry. And now with the Horizon 2020 program, we see a lot of attention of the solutions that can arrive from many new technologies to the industry, as well as in many other aspects.
So,
these programs are really big, and they're huge. In their structure, they want multiple companies from multiple regions, mixes of universities and commercial entities to work together. So they have a tendency to create indeed industries and collaborations.
Of course, and like in, for example, in Silicon Valley, it can become a job to deal with venture capitalists, to know the language, to know how to convince them to sell to them your idea. In Europe, it had become a job to write European projects. You know, there are professionals that just do that.
I want to point out, too, that the German government not only funded a lot of augmented reality research, but funded a lot of work in the Industry 4.0 movement in order to keep German manufacturing competitive. They, 15, 20 years ago, saw the manufacturing leaving Western countries and going to Asian countries, and in the advances in mechanization and in intelligent machines and robotics into the manufacturing space gave rise to many other innovations, machine vision, smart connected objects, and these contribute to data sources for augmented reality, smart spaces.
Yeah. In fact, I have to say that augmented reality has become like a competitive advantage that you have to have in the industry. If you don't have some kind of way to show or to provide a way to display the information that you achieve or you receive from different sources in relation with a physical space, you get behind, and you have to update your own mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. So you've seen some of that. So we talked about European level funding. Can each of you attest that you have national level funding sources also? Giovanni, you said in Italy there's for cultural heritage national funding.
There's a German leadership, of course, in Europe, and the story of Metaio you started the panel with is it's quite a good example of how things should work, because in Italy too we have programs of technological transfer somehow inspired by things going on in Boston since many years. So you have spin-offs coming from the best research departments, that should theoretically become companies and stay alive in the market. But I think that is the hard thing for innovative companies to be able to stay alive in a market that quickly becomes too small. And so there are many programs that maybe don't give funding as you are used to have in the United States, but they promote the internationalization of European excellence yes, the connection, I think, with the academic world is a model that is quite common all around Europe, and it's one of our peculiarities, I think. Innovation comes from research.
Yeah, I can. It's totally the same in Switzerland. There is, I think it's maybe even very new, maybe something from the last 10, 15 years, that there is lots of programs to help people who want to spin off university research in a company with either money or training or incubators or coaching.
Business coaching.
Yeah, and that's very important, and I think that starts to slowly give results. Then when you go one step further, there is, in terms of funding, well, there is, I'm not even sure, I might have even heard this in this panel, but there is this nice joke that if you go to a Swiss investor and you say, I need $1 million for my company, then they will say, well, can you maybe also do it with 800,000? And if you go to an investor in the US, you say, I need $1 million for my company, then they will tell you, well, maybe you need 10 million and you can also do this, this, and this. And that is probably still a problem in Europe, that if you really need the money to make a big step, to really scale up, that it's harder to find.
That's why I recently moved to Switzerland, because in Italy,
it's already better probably than
because if you go there and I need $1 million, they say, okay, can you do it with 30,000? And yes, no, it's really, really.
Yeah.
So you're trying to raise some money.
Yeah, it's just we are a continent of small fishes. So when a big fish from the United States comes, it automatically removes fishes from the pool in that sense, because the problem with funding in Spain at least is that there are way too many middlemen in between, and while there are a lot of incubators, a lot of consulting firms, it is very difficult to get funding for a project that gets bigger if you want to completely achieve your goals. It's way too big. If your project is too big, you have to find funding elsewhere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so to summarize, funding is an issue. There's good news and bad news, right? There's a lot of government sources, but they're limited in how far they will take you. They do expect you to turn this into a bona fide business and get acquired by another company. Last point I want to talk about is, isn't it interesting that in Europe we don't have very many hardware companies?
Yeah.
I mean, really, when I think about augmented reality in the ecosystem, there's just dozens and dozens of companies, but very, very few that make hardware solutions. Do you have any insights into why that could be, or?
Well, I think there are hardware companies on the component levels. So there is spin-offs from universities that do optical stuff or that do necessary components. Then there are some hardware companies that do some glasses, but nothing near the level of HoloLens or Meta or something. Then we also don't have like a smartphone industry or something. So maybe there's just no big consumer electronics industry.
We had one.
We had one.
Just say goodbye.
No,
so
I know that Luxottica has recently moved in San Francisco to open a lab, an innovation lab.
Carl Zeiss in Europe also?
Carl Zeiss.
Carl
Yes,
Zeiss.
to make some wearable devices that will be definitely related to augmented reality, and I hope so. And yes, I think that the three of us don't know enough about the bank system of Europe that I think has a different tradition in dealing with risk. And I think this could be another component of the funding problem that came out, that maybe we are not the right panel to discuss.
To discuss funding.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to ask if there's anybody in the question, anybody in the audience that has any questions for us that might want to ask them at this time, or yes, do you want to get a microphone?
I was wondering if you could comment on the failure rate of startups in Europe versus the United States. Is there, what's the percentage? Is there a difference?
I don't personally know of the statistics. You have some statistics.
No, I don't know the statistics, but I know that good startups that can that are born in Italy or in Europe can easily move to Silicon Valley, have a big success there, you know, because we export a lot of talented people all around the world. And so, yes, I don't know. Of course, for the problems that we said, I wouldn't suggest to open any kind of startup in Europe, or open an office and a lab in Europe, but then soon open another office in San Francisco or in Boston, as we were saying. Because, yes, you have to think globally from the beginning, I think.
Yeah. Also, there is a cultural factor there. Here in the US, if you fail, well, you can try again. Whereas in Europe, if you fail, you are a failure yourself.
You're signed for the rest of your life.
I was hoping somebody was going to say that, because that's the sense I have. I think that the environment around risk, there's just a much lower appetite for risk culturally in these countries. except on the one hand, though, they spoke about, pack your bags and head to North America where you can fail more easily or succeed more easily. One of the factors I've seen, too, is that companies start and they stay in their home geographies. For many, many years, Matteo stayed in Germany. There are many other companies that are great AR companies that are only selling in Germany, or they're only selling in France. You go to their websites, there's no information in English or in other languages. So some companies, and culturally they prefer to do business with people in the like culture and their like currency and in their same language. And there's such a fragmented market. There's whatever it is, 30 countries. It's very, very fragmented.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, what I find funny actually is that I also been to Augmented World Expo in Berlin, and it's a bit of a different conference than what we're having here now. But the speakers here and the speakers there had very similar topics, but they're from different companies. There's an American version of the company and a European version of the company. So it's maybe even both ways. Like an American company that does something with, I don't know, there's this cool demo here with the touch sensation on the hand. They were not in Berlin, I think. It's both ways, that we just have separate worlds, and that only the real big ones go to the other continent to show what they're doing.
That's a European company.
Oh, very good, very good. Then
and there's probably the same event happening in China with the Chinese companies talking about how they don't want to go to Europe or to America. They can't understand the culture. They can't get funding. So it's a very strong regional effect. You can use this mic.
Thank you. So I just wanted to wrap it up here. I want to thank you guys.